Hi, everyone. We've got some technical difficulties going on, and I know there may be some issues with people accessing the link or whatever. So my apologies. My plan is to send out this link to this webinar to everyone afterwards, but we've got a lot to cover today, so I wanted to get right on top of things. The application season is upon us, and I know a lot of you guys are probably out there going, what do you mean it's upon us? The application doesn't open until May. We can't submit until June. What's the big hassle? And you're going to find out today that that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that people make, waiting too late to start their personal statement, compile their experiences, etc. So what I'm hoping to share with you today are some really key tips on making the most of your personal statement and how to maximize your experiences. I don't know if any of you guys can see me. Would you do me a favor and in the chat box below, if any of you guys can tell me if you can see the video feed or if you can only see the PowerPoint. If you can see the video feed, just give me a thumbs up or something and I'll get it going, or type in the box below and let me know. I don't see anybody typing yet. Can you guys hear me? Can you see me? Nobody's messaging. My audience out there, can you see or hear me? I guess that's me, the MD. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, hoping that somebody can see or hear me. If you can't, type in the chat box here, and we're going to get rolling. So basically, I just sent a message to all of you guys to ask if you can see or hear me, or you can't, let me know. I'm going to roll on with this. Hopefully it's at least recording in the background and I can send it to anybody who can't. So anyway, let's talk about what we're getting started with today. So I am Dr. Anita Paschal. I've been doing this, I am a dinosaur, people. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've counseled well over 10,000 students. I was the director at an R1 excuse me, D1 institution where I actually mentored and guided students who wanted to go from college to med school for almost 15 years. I work on 5 different medical admissions committees, so I've really gotten that back behind the scenes part. And I am an MD. I've been exactly where you guys are. I've wanted to get into med school, and I've worked through this whole process, and I've been through that whole anxious year of waiting, hoping to find out that my dreams would come true. So if in the process of going through this talk today, if any of you guys have any questions, just put them in the chat box below. Hopefully that's all working, but let's get rolling. A lot to cover, because I'm going to give you 10 key points on what I feel are the ways to maximize your personal statement, 10 points to maximize your experiences, and how I and we here at the Princeton Review can help with that process. So before I get started, and hopefully this is going to work because I see there are several people online, so at least some people found the link. I'm going to send out a poll just so I have an idea of the audience that I'm working with. So if you can tell me when you hope to apply, if you've already applied and maybe this is a backup for the next time, if you're applying this coming cycle, meaning the one that opens in June, or the next application cycle or in the future. So it looks like about 3/4 of you guys are planning to apply this upcoming cycle, and some of you guys in the future. This is going to be relevant any way you look at it. All right, so with that said, let's get rolling. So let's talk about this timeline, because I just told you guys when we started that now is the time. Okay, so this time really reflects what you should be working on, and this is what I do with my own students that I mentor. Between November and right now, I've already told them to start brainstorming. I give examples, I've got lots of tips or whatever, but to begin drafting their personal statement and start thinking about requesting their letters of recommendation. Between now and February with my students, I am working with them to get the very first draft of their personal statement and their experiences. And I'm going to tell you how to compile those in just a minute. But you want to think about it like you want to go through at least 3 major drafts. And you should have set a timeline for yourself that between now and February, you should have the first draft of your personal statement and your experiences knocked out. Using March for a second review with yourself, with others, and I'm going to give you some tips on that. And then by April, you should have your personal statement and your experience experiences completely finalized. You should have requested all of your letters of recommendation, and I request that if people are not submitting to a committee at their school, or if they're not submitting directly to AMCAS, that they use a letter compilation service to help capture those confidential letters of recommendation, so that when the application cycle opens, you can directly move those from your confidential carrier like Interfolio or several of the ones that are out there, or from your committee directly to AMCAS. Because the problem is, since AMCAS and ACOMAS and Texas do not open until May for keying of information, they also don't open at that time for you to transfer your letters. And sometimes people don't like to or want to send those letters until they have that form to send them. Well, the problem is, especially with your professors, come May, I've been one of those, we're often piecing out, and it gives you a limited time to capture those letters. So if you can start requesting, or at the very least meeting with your recommenders between now and the next month and a half or so, providing them with a draft of your personal statement, providing them with a list of what your key experiences and accolades are, kind of in a more formal resume format, or send them your resume with a sheet that has 5 to 6 of your top selling points, your GPA, activities you've done, things that they could recognize in their letter. It will make their letter writing much more efficient, and guarantee that you're probably going to get a better letter in return. So with that said, use between now and April to be getting those letters together. Get a first, a second, and a third draft of your personal statement and your experiences completed and finalized by April, so that when May opens, you can start keying all of this information directly into your application service. You're not trying to compile all this information, write your personal statement. And people do underestimate how much it's going to take to write their personal statement and their experiences. This is not like a paper for a class. It requires multiple drafts, multiple times of thinking. People often say, well, but I had my family member read it. You need to search out people who don't know you. See if all of these things make sense, and really follow the tips. Also, as soon as the application opens in May and your May transcripts have been verified, if you're still in school, send those directly out. Send your transcript in May, start keying your application, so that when June comes, you're ready to submit. You can use June to start pre-writing some of your secondary essays. There are lots of links out there that kind of show you last year's essays, and you can start building like a diversity essay. Why this school? Tell me something unique about yourself. All of the typical questions that we often get in secondary essays, because come July, about 80 to 85% of schools now automatically generate secondaries. So you're going to get secondaries from schools that may or may not look at you, but how do you make that decision of who you're going to actually send secondaries to? I will actually be doing a webinar in April on the top tips for not making the most common applicant mistakes. And in July, I'll be doing a webinar talking about your secondaries and how to handle your interview. So I don't want to concentrate too much on that, but as much as you can do to be ahead of the game come secondary time in July, the better off you're going to be. And again, typically interviews are going to come somewhere between August and January, although they can well go into February and March. And thinking about how your follow-up goes with schools, your letters of continued interest and intent will go out somewhere around November, December. The problem is that people often put this off. They wait till April or May to start drafting their personal statement. They get behind. That holds up submitting their application. And with rolling admissions, as well as most schools getting 10 to 15,000 applications at a time, you want to make sure that you're at the top of that pile to maximize your chances. So with that said, let's get first to those 10 key points to remember in writing your personal statement. And the first thing I want to tell you is to write, rewrite, let it sit, and write it again. And this is the whole point. As many times as you write it and rewrite it, it's just where your brain plays tricks with you, but you'll miss typos, you'll miss spelling errors. And the one thing that my father always taught me growing up is write something out, set it down for 24 to 48 hours, come back and revise it. Do that again a couple of times. Then bounce it off some people who know you. Then if you have the access to it, get to somebody who doesn't know you so they can really get that feedback. So let's talk about that in point here. The first, back off cliches. The biggest mistakes that I see with personal statements is that people are either A, they are trying to sell themselves in terms of, I really want to be a doctor because, and it's always, we all want to help and serve people. We like science. We want to make a difference. I don't know how many personal statements I read a year with people who had their grandmother died and they want to make sure they find a cure so no one ever has to go through what their grandmother did, etc. And all of those reasons are good reasons to want to go to med school. But you've got to remember that the average med school is sifting through thousands of these, and they all say the same thing. So you want to be unique. You want to make sure that your story radiates yourself, but it also should not sound like a sales pitch. I really want to be a doctor because I'm very compassionate. Because it needs to radiate from the story you tell, which is where we come to point 2, is that you should be interesting. Admissions committees are not looking for a brave new world on the world. They're looking for a view of you, what you bring to the table, what's interesting about you and unique. And so when we talk about it, we say show, don't tell. So big thing is, I always call it the politician answer, and I just alluded to that just a second ago, where you talk about, I am a very compassionate person. I have learned that through my experiences, I relate well to others. Well, crap, anybody can say that. Demonstrate it. If you are going to show, don't tell me you're compassionate. Give me a story that shows a struggle or an interaction that you've had with somebody where you have been supportive, that your compassion has stood out. And also, please be very, very careful of using the word I. And again, I know you're telling your personal statement, so you often go, but I need to say I. Try to avoid using I to ever start a paragraph. Count how many times you say the word I in a particular paragraph and try to rephrase it. Even if you just say, for instance, while I was working versus I was working at such and such, and make sure that you back things up. People will always remember stories that you share versus if you just tell them something. So if you can make a point, especially when you're doing your catch to catch in your personal statement, if you can tell a story that makes me want to read what comes after that, you're going to be much more convincing. And I'll get onto that more. Don't ramble. Rambling not only uses up key characters, and you've got 5,300 characters for AMCAS and ACOMAS, you've only got 5,000 for TMDSAS. So if you're working in this parameter, we give you a limited number of characters because we want to see if you can express yourself in a limited number of characters. You can't ramble and do that. Avoid using 5-line sentences and always speak in an active voice or use active words. And one of my pet peeves is don't say doctor, say physician. I know sometimes people will say Dr. G or G said. Even if it's not a real name for the person, don't use a first and last name, but give a name. And so put it in quotes if you want to, but Dr. Smith taught me, or Greg, this child that I worked with, because it puts almost a name with a face. And then when you're talking about it, avoid words like, I got the opportunity. You want to say, I had the fortunate opportunity to. Now, again, I've told you, you've got to be conscious of your characters, but also use words that are more than just 3 words. And I know we're in the texting age, and it is so much easier with where we are, but step back and make sure that you're using a professional tone, that you're using a tone that shows active and proactive sort of statements, so that we feel like you're engaging in what you're doing. All right. I know a lot of people come to me about this all the time. Do I address my GPA? Do I address my MCAT? Do I address something in experiences? So there are 2 sides to this, okay? You've got very limited space. If you have something that is very glaring, that may potentially keep you out of a school, you want to speak to it and address it quickly. And then you want to use that don't make excuses, just acknowledge it and move on. If you are a reapplicant, you want always to put a positive spin on something. So maybe you want to, and I get this a lot, as a reapplicant, do I need to completely rewrite my personal statement? And no, you don't. If you had a good personal statement to start with, you can use that same core and update it, but you always want to include a small paragraph that states something about your reapplication process. You can acknowledge that, like any other student, you would have loved the opportunity to have gained acceptance your first application cycle. However, this additional time, this additional year has allowed you to gain more clinical experience or more service or really experience real world life, or how you've grown and matured through those experiences. If you have a major GPA issue, you may want to say somewhere where you're talking about maybe you experienced a personal illness. Several of my students have battled cancer, and they talk about how their sophomore year was rocked when they were diagnosed with cancer. It would ultimately have an impact on their GPA, but how they've overcome that. Or maybe a parent's divorce or some incidental finding, but you want to address it briefly and move on. Almost every secondary has a paragraph that says, is there anything else you want us to know, or a time. You can use secondary applications to address that issue. Remembering that for all students, and this is where kids get so caught up thinking their personal statement is going to be the end all be all for the universe. Well, what we know is that the first line screen, if you keep in mind that the average school is going to get about 10,000 applications, if they try to hand screen all of those initially, nobody would ever get accepted. So the first line thing is generally a GPA and an MCAT score to see if you clear the baseline thresholds. That is done electronically. Typically, most schools have a program that will allow X number and above to automatically clear, and then it goes to the next clearinghouse. If you're a little bit below their threshold, there is typically an area that looks for special circumstances, special and underserved, underrepresented groups, as well as slightly lower GPA and MCAT, because again, there can be things that happen that impacted that, and they will most commonly hand screen those. Number two is going to be the part we're going to talk about second, and that's actually experiences. People think, oh, I've cleared the threshold, I got a secondary, they're pouring over my personal experience. And that typically doesn't happen until you pass the second part, and that's experiences. And we're going to talk about how to craft those so they are most effective. But you need to understand that experiences are also almost always all schools evaluated first electronically. There are core AMCAS, ACOMAS, and Texas experiences. It looks for what is your distribution of all of those experiences, basically how much service, how much clinical experience, how much research. Then we look for the breadth of years and the number of service hours that have actually comprised that, and it actually weights it. And so it will give a distribution. So a lot of times I will see students who maybe have really significant clinical, but essentially no service. And I always say to them, this is a very service-driven career. If you have not hit key main checkboxes, that may very well keep you out of that next line screen. And again, remembering 85% of secondaries are automatically generated. So you may get a secondary, that still doesn't mean you've passed the screen. If you pass those screens, then typically there will be a reviewer who gets to look at your personal statement. And by that point, you want to make the most of it. So you don't want to get pulled into that, I used too many cliches. It looked very self-serving with all of my eyes. I rambled on and left a boring personal statement. If you've made it to catch my attention, I always talk about it like you think about it like dating. If there's somebody who's caught your attention, if there is some reasons that you wanted to reach out to them, that you think they're attractive or something that they've done, or you admire their experiences, and then you get to sit down with them and you're like, whoa, who are you? If you get to that point, your personal statement needs to sell who you are. Watch your transitions. I get this all the time. A personal statement basically should be thought up as 5 to 6 key paragraphs. Your first paragraph should be a catch. How many times do you go to the movie theater and you see a trailer and you go, I have no idea what that movie is going to be about? Or you go, that looks pretty cool, I want to watch that. That is what you want your catch to be, something that brings me in. I actually had a personal statement with a student, and she's given me permission to talk about her personal statement in some of my discussions, but she actually started her personal statement with, I often wondered why I painted my nails, or the significance of it. My mother and I, for as long as I can remember, have got our nails painted every other week since I was a little girl. And I'm like, oh, good Lord, where is she going with this? And then she gave gave me this transition that said, but that would become also clear as my work as a scribe in the ER. And I'm going, boy, how's she going to make that leap? But I was intrigued. I wanted to know what she was talking about. She actually used her personal statement to talk about how she had worked in an ER, and when there was a special code on the board, that meant somebody had passed and they were going to donate their organs. And this particular day, there were two such events, and her second one, when she went down to meet with the person in the family and the body was covered, the only thing that was exposed were the toenails and the fingers of this girl who was the same age as her, who happened to have the same nail polish on. And it made her think about how this could have been her, the relationship with her family. She saw this distraught family. She saw the other things, and her role as a physician was not just administering of care, but realizing there was that person. It was a wonderful personal statement that gave me a catch that allowed her to share her clinical experience, her service, her compassion without ramming it down my throat, and then she tied it back together. And that's the next point. If you start a catch, you want to have a stream of thought that brings you from one experience to the next, so that it helps us to flow and we see a transition that is logical. Again, that I know what you're talking about, and a reader who does not know you, who has not looked at any of your experiences, might have some idea of who the heck you are. Use an active voice. I had somebody the other day who wrote a whole personal statement in the third person voice, and it was like, he walked into the room and saw this, and I went, he who? You? No. I don't want to hear that. This is not, don't try to be fluffy. The other thing is also, don't try to write this like it's a play written by Shakespeare or to show all of your lofty knowledge. It's the same mistake that people make in doing their interviews, where they talk at me instead of talk with me, and you're not engaging. You don't realize that we're reading tons of these, just like we're doing tons of interviews. So the more active, the more engaging, and the more interesting you can be, the more we'll want to reach out to you. Seek multiple opinions. And I've already told you this. Before you hit submit, ask several people to read your personal statement and your experiences to give you feedback. Have people tell you, can I follow this? Do I understand what you're talking about? Can I visualize and see it? And the best thing you could do is give somebody who really doesn't necessarily know you or really doesn't necessarily know your past to just give you advice on whether or not they can follow it. Don't critique it for, grammar or all that other stuff. Just, does it make sense? And that is one of the best stop gates that you could possibly make. I apologize for the ding in the background. I had silenced everything on my laptop, but who the heck knows why it's doing it, but ding, it's going back, whatever. All right, focus. Your personal statement should highlight interesting aspects about yourself, about your journey. It is not meant to tell your entire life story. That's why you only got 5,300 characters. You can't. It should tell a portion of your journey that reflects how you got here and why. If you have a really interesting past, if you've had hurdles that you've overcome, that will allow us, because remember, when we're reading that personal statement, we're not only looking for the type of doctor you're going to be, but a sense of who that person is and how you might actually fit into our class as a whole. Be mindful of the 4 R's. I already talked to you about these before, and I know it's not an R I can spell. Write, review, revise, repeat. A minimum of 3 drafts reviewed by others and multiple on your own. So pointers. Watch your word count. A lot of times I get people who feel like they put a lot in the essays, and then they get to the last part, the last paragraph, and they're like, crap, I've got 100 characters left. And it just like throws it at me, because your last paragraph should reflect back to the beginning, and it should also give me some type of challenge for you going forward. Take a systematic approach. Know you've got to have a beginning intro and an end, and what are the parts you're going to put in the middle? Ideally, if at all possible, it should reflect some aspect of your clinical exposure and understanding, and some aspect that shows a commitment to service and compassion. Oftentimes we tell people to write out your journey. Write out key events that have happened throughout your life. Check out ones that you think might be relevant to this journey. Outline first. You learn this stuff in grade school, people. Write an outline, write the points that are going to go in it, start to carve it out. I always tell people, make it longer, cut it back. Oftentimes your first draft may be 7,500 excuse me, 7,500 characters. You can cut that back to tell your story. Look at where you're wordy or stuff that's maybe unnecessary, but get your points in there and then start cutting back. Use that 5 to 6 paragraph approach that I talked to you about, an intro and a conclusion with 3 to 4 significant paragraphs that address your journey, who you are, and if you are a reapplicant or if you have an issue or a weakness, address concisely to show growth and how you moved forward. All right, so next step, and let me check right here to make sure that no one, and I can't get it open up to there, make sure there aren't any key questions or problems. Doesn't look like I've got them there. So we're going to keep moving on. Let's get to our experiences. So in terms of your experiences, I need you to understand that AMCAS puts out the 15 core competencies. Those core competencies are the same things that ACOMAS and Texas look at as they review your experiences and the work you've done. Basically, they are pre-professional competencies, the things that you have done to get you to this point. Thinking and reasoning, critical thinking, quantitative reasoning, written communication comes a lot from what you're doing here, and then your science competencies. So we're looking at your understanding of all of these and your growth. So sometimes we often say, a lot of kids will say to me, I don't have any research experience. And critical thinking and scientific inquiry is one of the best ways to tap into that. So make sure if you haven't done that, that you've at least engaged in something, be it a project or a thesis or something that shows that ability to think and work through and problem solve. You want to go down and first list out all of your experiences, everything you've done. Take AMCAS's, because this is going to be your experience for formatting. They're going to ask if it's the most meaningful. Remember that in AMCAS you get 15 experiences. And I'm often bothered by this very part, that there are 15 core competencies. It does not mean that each experience should match one of the core competencies. Some experiences may match 2, 3, 4, 5 or more. Others will not match any of these. But when you get done writing out your 15 experiences, you want to make sure that you have at least exhibited those core competencies in your experiences in one way or another. I can tell you that one of the schools that I review for before we can submit a student to committee, we literally have to sit down with their experiences and to check off to see if the statements that they made in their essays or the experiences they did can demonstrate those core competencies. When you talk about the type, I want you to go through, list out everything that you've done, and we'll talk about this in just a second. If you've got more than 15, that's great, and you can start clumping things together. Oftentimes, I tell my students to take all of their shadowing experiences and you list them in one experience rather than going, I shadowed Dr. A for 8 hours, that's going to be experience. Dr. B for 6 hours, that's going to be another experience. Because remember, electronically screened, that's going to come off as a one-time event for 8 hours. If you put all of your shadowing into one experience that says physician shadowing and understanding unpaid clinical, and it's over high, and remember, we don't want things from high school unless they continue into college. So maybe you shadowed some in high school and you went back and shadowed them in college. You can list several years and combine all of your hours of shadowing, so it comes out that maybe your unpaid clinical shadowing is actually 250 hours over 6 years that encompasses 9 specialties. And then you give it a name. Now, we really look at these experience names, so make sure that your experience name gives an indication of what you've done, so that it's, when we start to read, we understand. So for example, maybe you've been in a sorority with multiple leadership positions. So you say ADPI officer position, 4 officer positions, and 4-year member. That's your experience name. I know what's coming. Think of it kind of like a trailer of what's yet to come. The date should be all encompassing. These are things and information you're going to need to know. Your organization name, title, phone, and email. Sometimes people retire or they're deceased, and you may want to give a current contact, or you can list your contact from that time. Now, when we're talking about descriptions, your 15 experiences, you have 700 characters, including spaces, and your 3 most meaningful, you get 700 characters and an additional 1325. You've got to make the most of those characters. We're going to talk about what they need to cover. So when you're thinking about your experiences, go out, list everything that you've done, sit down and list how many are going to fall into these categories. Look at these with respect to how much show leadership, how much shows clinical, how much shows service that you've done. Is that clinical paid or unpaid? So that we can kind of see how all of your experiences fall out. The other thing is, we like to see you are well balanced. So extracurricular activities, hobbies, artistic endeavors, because we're also looking at how you're going to be able to relate to other people and how you're going to fit into your class. So make sure there is a good balance, but above all, make sure that most importantly, service and clinical exposure is covered, as well as, if you have it, research experience. Okay, so when you go into your experiences, and again, 700 characters and your most meaningful, it should be a very brief statement or sentence that talks about the organization or that experience, and if it was a position or a project. So for instance, in Dr. Such and Such's lab, where I worked for 3 years, my role, our lab studied X, Y, and Z. My role within the lab was to do this. In my exposure, and this is so important, your experience must speak to the core competencies, and it must speak to the growth you made as a result of that experience, and then how it has helped you mature into a better applicant. And if I read one more time this week, this experience will help me in my future as a physician to relate to people. Yeah, that you just wasted characters, because that is so mundane and so same old, same old. It should show the character and your personal growth, and how that has either helped affirm your commitment or has helped you learn from that experience to be a better leader, to appreciate what clinical is about, appreciate the importance of service, to gain a better understanding of underserved populations, etc. So it is much more important that you speak specifically to your growth and how that has helped you as an applicant. All right, so key pointers. The first is to describe what you did, not the generic position description, but your role, what you did, and how you learned. Make sure that you focus on you and your passions, not the organization or the people who are in it. But, and I will tell you, this is so important because it's one of the key things we look at. Here again, be wary of starting sentences with I. Look at transitions and speak more as a team approach. So for instance, in your research lab, you may state, my duties involved X, Y, and Z. Our team, we were able. If you're talking about your sorority or your fraternity, our group did such and such. My role was to do this. I was instrumental in helping us gain. Because again, if it's I, we're wondering what kind of team player you're going to be in the future as a physician, and what kind of team player you're going to be within your class. And are you truly passionate about it? Can you sell it? I should be able to read these and your personal statement and feel your gut calling here within you. It is always beneficial, even within the short 700 character parameter, and especially with your most meaningful, to include an experience or a story so that we can visualize you in that role. One of the good examples that we talk about is maybe if you're talking about working with Big Brother, Big Sister, or if you're talking about working with Meals on Wheels, and you talk about delivering your meals and getting the opportunity to maybe meet and get to know your regulars, but maybe give me a story with one of your regulars that touched your heart. Or share with me something about your little from Big Brother, Big Sister that helped open your eyes to something about you. Or maybe an experience with hospice where you interacted with not only the dying person, but their family and that impact. Show me that you get what medicine is about, that it's not just helping and serving and making a difference and treating people and making the world a better place, but it is about that, but how you get it and your role with doing that. And don't just write for sake's sake. I get this all the time. Sometimes less is more. We're not counting the characters, and I will tell you that when it comes back to us, all we see is what you've written in there. It doesn't say 659 characters used or 500. Now, 2 tokens for this. Make sure you've done your character counts and you're within them, because what happens is if you go over character count, it cuts off whatever you say, and we know you weren't paying attention. Part number 2 is if you do one word sentences that said, I was the president of such and such club and I did this, we're going to know nothing about you. And so you can really, really hurt yourself with these if you do not follow these key tips. Be sure to include how you improved, matured, and learned from your experience. Also discuss how that fits into medical school and your future career as a healthcare provider. Maybe you worked full-time 30 hours a week throughout college to support yourself. That not only has helped you balance and multitask and handle multiple issues and sort through problems, but it's also helped you better appreciate working with other people, working with people who are older than you. Maybe you're a manager and it's helped you learn how to manage people older and younger than you. Maybe it's helped you respect the role of your manager in helping supervise you. But really think about how you've grown through each and every experience that you've listed here. Use a specific story, like I said, to really bring the experience to life and to drive home your growth points. All right, so first, list and organize. Make a list of everything that you think stands out, and then assort it by categories. And I tell people, just go through and make a whole list and list the categories and do a web. See where you might think that they might fit into, and then look at the balance of where you are. Are you too research heavy? Are you too service heavy? And you can't ever be too heavy, but you can only be too heavy on those if you're delinquent in the other areas. Then when you go back to them, like I said, lay them out. If you have 15 and more and you're having to combine them, that's great. However, the key takeaway is if you've listed 5 hobbies, or you've listed every award or every honor society you're in, we call that fluffing. Okay, you should combine them into one category. If you have less than 15, you need to recheck, make sure you're not missing anything. And if you've got less than 9, actually really more like 10 or 11, you may not be ready to apply. So look at where you may be deficient. You need to remember, I get, and trust me, I've talked about this time and time again in what I do, pre-meds, and I was a pre-med just like you guys, you're all like hamsters on a treadmill, because at 18, 19, 20, or if you're a career changer and you're like, but I'm already 32, 34, I really need to get this done, it can seem very pressing to do it right now. But you want to be the best applicant. You're competing against thousands of people, tens of thousands. We're looking at well over 53,000 applicants coming in this year. How are you going to stand out? How are you going to stand out to a school that has 100 slots and gets 10,000 applications? You need to make sure that you are well-rounded on all points. You may have a great GPA and a great MCAT, but if you have no clinical experience or no service, that's not going to benefit you. You may have tons of experience and you really get what this is all about, but your GPA and MCAT may not be there. You've got to take the time to make sure that you're the best applicant going in, and you want it to be the first time and the only time. Because if you don't get in because you were not ready, then you become a reapplicant. That screening threshold is going to be much harder. I have talked before how a lot of schools will not review you the first year now after you have been denied, because they feel like you should have fixed all the reasons you did not get in before reapplying. And I know a lot of people are working on those during their application year, but you may have already sealed your fate. Make sure that you are well balanced and that you can, because you're going to be standing up against people. Maybe you've got great service and great clinical, but your GPA is a little subpar, but you're going to be competing against people who have all of those things. So I feel like a commercial, be all that you can be, but that's really the truth of it all. Just say no to high school. And I know this is hard because a lot of you guys did a lot of really, really good things in high school. You participated in clubs. You did a lot of volunteering when you were in high school. Maybe you did mission trips with your church or whatever. And the problem is, unless you did and started something while you were in high school and continued it on into college, we don't want to see that unless that spans into your years now. So maybe you're volunteering with hospice in high school and you continue that into college, then you can use those breadth of years, but you really want to focus on your growth in college. So please, please, please do not fill up experience. It will automatically be a black mark against you. Strive for accuracy, because this may come up in your interview. As a general rule, you want to be as close as possible. So I did a review yesterday and I'm looking at the hours, and it was a 2-week experience or a 3 or a 4-week experience, or maybe even just a summer study abroad. And it was an exorbitant number of hours, like a summer study abroad for 600 hours. And what they were capturing was their in-country time, waking and sleeping. Well, if I ask you how many hours you work at a job, you don't list for me that waking, sleeping, and everything. So in a 5-day work week, if you're at work 8 to 5, you're doing a 40-hour work week with your lunch break. You're not doing 24-hour days. So make sure you're accurate. We often talk about that we haven't been following you around. So I don't say glorify, but you also have to remember that you want to come across as knowing what you're talking about. So if you say, in my research lab, I was responsible for these 15 different things, and I ask you in your interview to talk to me about your research, and it's clear you don't know jack boo squat about what you were doing, it's going to be an automatic pretty much denial against you, and it will weigh very heavily. So if it looks like you have overly fluffed your experiences, and again, or if you put an extensive amount of hours and you write just, I was a scribe for 6 months in a hospital, and that's all you talk about, it's going to give much less credence to either one of them. Be selectful about your most meaningful. And I know people often struggle about what are going to be their most meaningful. And this is actually, there are 2 ways to look at this. So again, you go through everything. If you've got a lot of research, then definitely that's likely going to be one of your most meaningful. Clinical experience or exposure ideally should be one of them, and service, but maybe you've got a lot of leadership where you really took an active role. But you want to be selective about those, but also give yourself a little bit of break, realizing this won't be your only shot. Most secondary essays will have a section that says, is there anything else you want to discuss? They'll ask you to talk about a time where you worked with a group or as a leader or whatever. So if you have, maybe you've got a service and a research and a clinical, and you've got some really good leadership, but you can only pick 3, then talk about how you grew from it in your 700 characters, and then maybe use that in a secondary essay. So remember, it's not a one and done. Again, people struggle so much because all they focus on is their primary application, and they forget there's a secondary and an interview. I did an onboarding call for one of my students yesterday who said, I just want to apply to a lot of schools so that I really get in. And that's really not the way you want to go with this. You want to truly sit down and do a chart of schools, and you want to compare your qualifications with their median expectations, and you want to look at what that school goes for. I mean, you may think you want to go to Hopkins. Hopkins is one of the top research institutions in the country. So they're really going to be looking for people with a lot of research background. If you don't have a lot of research, you're probably not going to be a great fit for them. Remembering that you're struggling to write your personal statement and your experiences now, but wait till you start paying for 40 or 50 schools. And then secondary essays go out to 85% of students who apply to schools. If I've applied to 40 schools and I get 40 secondaries and the average school has 4 essays, holy crap, look at how many essays you're going to be writing in very short order. 40 times 4. Yeah, that's it. And we want those returned in a couple of weeks. So be very selective about where you're applying and how your fit's going to be. Do the same thing when you're thinking about your experiences. How did they best show who you are as an applicant? Switch up your wording. We've talked about this. We talk about try to avoid using the word doctor, use the word physician, use we instead of I. Always, please, like I said at the end, and this experience will help me become a better physician in the future. Don't repeat the same thing. Stay away from I. Switch up your transitions. Try to use an intro word or phrase at the beginning of sentences so that they flow from one thing to the next. Show growth and understanding. Again, I've already talked about this, but that cannot be overemphasized enough. If you talk about an experience and you don't show how you benefited from it somehow in talking about it, even if it's, I had the opportunity to gain experience with all of these assays, it helped me appreciate truly the time and dedication that research takes. It's more about the failures and the importance of working with my team, and it's really helped me understand that time and its role in the future of medicine. Advocate for yourself. Pointers about you, things you've done, experience you have that others may not. Maybe you've traveled to 25 countries and you put down hobbies, travel as an experience, travel to over 25 countries, both independently and with your parents. And then you talk about it, understanding cultural appreciation, a respect of what maybe you learned from a different culture, a different race, feeling vulnerable, and how later on as a scribe you were able to translate for someone who felt vulnerable from a similar country. Again, show your growth and understanding. That's what they're for. Choose relevant things and how they fit into your journey. Oftentimes, I get people who use Dean's List as an experience. You're applying for med school. I hope your GPA is high enough that you were on the Dean's List. And with that said, Dean's List should never be a standalone experience. If you're going to reference it, you can reference it in honors and awards with other awards that you have gained. And honestly, we tend to gloss right over those. If you're in an honors program, you can list that either as it was part of your research or the other accolades that you got, but pick relevant things to your journey. I would far rather see research and service. And if you've got publications, you may want to reference them where you talk about your research, and maybe you do a snippet that lists your publications. Again, this is not a resume, and that's exactly my next point. Know the format. It is not a resume. It is a journey and a chance for you to show who you are. And avoid the fluff. Oh, good Lord, fluff, fluff, fluff. Avoid talking like you are some astute little erudite professor. I mean, you don't want to use basic juvenile language, but by the same token, you don't want to wear me out like you just threw up a thesaurus on your personal statement or your experiences. You don't have to use all the characters. Make points that briefly and succinctly summarize, be clear and concise, and make memorable points that will set you up for an interview. Generally, if I have an open file and I'm going to interview somebody, I will glance over it at 5 minutes max. Generally, we're going to spend 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes looking over that application. We're looking for key points of things I want to ask you about. All right, before I take some questions, and hopefully they will be able to come out here, I did want to see kind of where all of you guys were, because here at the Princeton Review, we have all kinds of test prep products that will help you best prepare for your MCAT. Again, that's going to be a critical part of the screen. If you need help in any of your classes, Lord knows organic chemistry and physics for me were just like pain on a stick. So if you're really struggling with a class, and if you're like me at midnight and you're trying to study for an exam, and obviously you can't get your professor or one of your closest friends unless they're sitting there studying with you, we have a 24/7 tutoring service that can help you. And then really knowing how you craft your personal statements, your experiences, your secondaries, what are your strengths, what are you missing to get you noticed. That's my job here at the Princeton Review and my team of reviewers. So with that said, Real quickly, if you would like information on any of these, specifically our different MCAT products, my MCAT products, which is what I actually help, our admissions products, which is what I actually help with, and ways to boost your pre-med GPA, if you want to know a little bit about our tutoring services, let me know and I'll make sure to have somebody reach out with you. If you're not completely sure right now, also you can go to a link on our website. If you go to medical admissions and it says take our test, and if you would like more information, you can actually fill that out, and I'll have my friend Mark, who actually helps me meet with people and gain a better understanding of their experiences, reach out to you in our enrollment center. So with that said, our job, as I said, was to help you get in. So how can I help you with that? Obviously, great grades, that's our tutoring systems. Great test scores. You can only get to take that MCAT 3 times in 1 year and 5 times for a lifetime. We don't want to see people take it more than 3 times, ideally more than 2. So make the most of your test prep. I'm going to tell you one of the biggest mistakes that people make is that they spend way too much time just focusing on the content. We'll help you go through all the reviews, but they don't spend enough time doing full-length practice tests. I can tell you that when my son, who, by the way, is applying for residency match day in March, getting ready to graduate from med school, did all of the practice tests twice. This is like training for a marathon, and I'm amazed at how many of my students I talk to who are like, yeah, I've done 3 practice tests. You wouldn't get up tomorrow and decide you're going to run for a marathon. Don't make your MCAT the same way. And then here in our medical admissions counseling, that's my role. That's what I do. We have all types of things we can help you with just your primary, but I really tell you it's your secondary essays are what's going to get you those interviews granted. So we have comprehensive programs with my team of coaches and counselors to get you start to finish. And then we also have our premier counseling, is where you work start to finish directly with me. I do all your reviews. I'm all of your standpoint. I do all your interview prep. I am your go-to to get you accepted. So with that said, if anybody has any questions, because I don't see anything in the chat box. So if there are questions that you have, I don't see any hand holding. Let me check again if there were any questions that you had. Let me check the questions here. If you had questions, ooh, both. You can see, you can hear, you can hear, you can hear. All right, so let me get to, thank you for the yes to both, much appreciated. I'm going to use the rest of our time to see if I can answer some of these questions. So, by the way, let me get to this last slide. If you have any questions, just email them to questions@review.com. Somebody will get those to me, or you can call us directly. But let me see some of your questions. Is June 5th too late to take the MCAT to apply this cycle? All right, so let me tell you what you want to do. If you are testing in any time from mid-May into June, what you want to do is you want to put your application together. When the application cycle opens, either the end of May, 1st of June, whenever it is, you want to submit, and that's for you too as well, in June, you want to submit to one super reach school, okay, a school that you are never going to get into based on where you are and that you would never likely be accepted to. What that does is it allows AMCAS to start reviewing and verifying your application. Nothing else is happening during this time. No schools are looking at you. At the beginning of the application cycle, it typically takes 3 to 6 weeks to get that verification done. The end of June, 1st of July, they will release to schools, okay? Secondary applications are almost automatically generated. I've said it, I've reset it. Most med schools really don't start looking at that content until August, okay? And so you're okay. So let's say June 5th, you take your MCAT, you get your test score back the first part of July, and you go, good to go. You add all of the schools you want to apply to. They will add immediately once you are verified, okay? Same thing, if you test in May and you don't know your score, you can go ahead and submit the first part of June. You wait till you get your score in June. You decide if you need a retest. That's perfectly fine. You can add a few schools. What we're trying to do is to protect you. If you test in June, you get your score in July, you're not where you want to be, you decide you're going to pull out of this cycle and apply next year, or you test in May and you decide you're going to retest, and you can update letters of recommendation and test dates anytime once you've submitted. You just cannot update any of those other parts of your application, your personal statement, your experiences, etc. Oh, and by the way, you can't add experiences in the future. So you can't add those in. They'll have to come in secondaries. But you can update MCAT test dates, and you can say, ooh, I need to add another test date. But what you don't want to do is put every school you want to apply to, get that score in July or mid-May and go, oh, wow, I'm not ready. And because if you do nothing else, nothing, you are still considered a reapplicant to all of those schools. And remember what I told you, about 50% now won't review the first year after you're denied. Others, you're going to go into a more stringent pool. All right, do we send letters of intent only after attending an interview? Okay, so letters of continued interest, which will go out around November, December, will go to any school that you haven't gotten a secondary from, or you've gotten a secondary but don't have an interview. Letters of intent to attend that school, go to schools that you've interviewed at but still have not been accepted at. And yes, you can send multiple letters of intent to multiple schools. They are not binding. Do they want to see teamwork over leadership? Actually, it's a balance. And that's actually a very good question. What they would like to see is in the leadership, and that's actually an excellent question, because what they want to see is that as a leader, you can lead. You can get people to believe in you, that you're a good leader and that people trust you, but that they also feel part of that team. As a future physician in leading your practice, you're going to have a bunch of people working for you. They need to trust in your leadership, that you're not going to walk in and lay them all off because you couldn't keep the practice running. But they also want to feel that they're valued in your team. So that is absolutely, it's actually both. So in your leadership or in your service activities or in your research, you want to speak to your ability to work with a team. What about conferences attended in high school? Generally, the answer to that is no. Conferences at the college level generally should be included with publications and presentations all under one heading. Does waiting too long to apply look bad? Oh my goodness. For example, year additional to a gap year to gain more experiences. No, exactly the opposite. I thought you were asking, is it bad to wait till like August or September to apply? Yeah, that would be the kiss of death. When we are talking about taking a gap year, first of all, you need to understand that the average admitting age is like 25 to 26. So most of those people are already in a gap year. About 30% of my applicants right now are over 30. And generally, it only becomes a negative if you are approaching 40. But taking a gap year is actually very, very highly looked upon. I will tell you, a lot of kids go, I graduated in 3 years. I'm only 18 or 19. We actually look at that as a negative because A, it looks like you didn't appreciate the journey. Secondly, we would like the older, more mature applicant that has done something other than just gone to undergrad and college or whatever. We want to know that maybe you've had an opportunity to work out in the real world, pay real bills, work with other people, gained additional experiences. I have never, ever, ever had a student take a gap year that it did not benefit them, except if they didn't do anything with it. Oh, I will also tell you that my own son is somebody who is just like that, who didn't want to take a gap year. And I don't know how many times he has said to me, I wish I had taken your advice. He had a 4.0 GPA. He had a solid MCAT. He had great experiences, but it's that same thing, being head down, working, going straight into med school, which is absolutely exhausting. Now he's going straight into residency and there is no time for a break. That has definitely weighed heavily on him, and it weighs heavily on a lot of people. You can actually benefit yourself. Does anybody have any other questions out there? If not, we are right on time, which is great to know. Thanks for all of you guys who were able to get into the link. I apologize for any of you due to the glitches that were not able to get to the link. As soon as we have this recording publicized and ready, I will send out a link. And if there were any out there who did not get the opportunity, please reach out to us directly on our website through here. If you have more interest in learning about our programs, I would love to help you all. Thanks so much. Have a great day, and thanks for tuning in.